So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome once again to the Cafe on Air podcast. I'm your host, Big Italy 42, here with a little bit of a heavy heart for my San Antonio Spurs last night and their loss to the New York Knicks. But in summation, the things that I found out from that, congratulations to the Knicks on the big win, which just so happens to be their biggest one against the Spurs since June 21st, 1999. Knicks knocked off the Spurs 89-81 in Game 3 of the Finals. Their only win during those NBA Finals. So, to my Knicks fans friends out there, I say congratulations. But at the end of the day, you probably didn't want that win, and the Spurs did. So, well played. Congratulations to you. It was an interesting night last night in the industry, in the NBA. Had some big scores, some surprise big scores, some guys who we expected big things out of that let us down, like James Harden once again, less than 40 points. Victor Oladipo had a big game, nearly 50 fantasy points. Andre Drummond, same story there. And the big story, the guy that Spencer Limbach and I talked about on yesterday's podcast, was Reggie Jackson. Became the second Pistons player this season alone to have 20 points and 20 assists in a game. He did that last night. 55 FanDuel points, even more on DraftKings. I mean, he had himself a great night in Greg Monroe's absence. Unfortunately, the Pistons do play tonight, but Greg Monroe expected back. So there goes the spacing on the floor once again. Not a whole lot there for Reggie Jackson with both Monroe and Drummond clogging up the middle. So don't expect a repeat performance from that, but I'll get to that in just a minute. I'm going to be talking FanDuel and DraftKings on this podcast. Got a nice slate of games tonight, 11 games. Some potential blowouts, some lower spreads, some injury concerns, but I'm going to go ahead and kick things off from the top here, going with point guard. And top option, as always, when he plays, Russell Westbrook, $13,200 on FanDuel, 12.6 on DraftKings. He's a guy, once again, I mean, there's really no middle ground here. I mean, the way I see it, you need some Russell Westbrook in case he puts up 80 fantasy points if you're playing multiple tournament lineups. However, don't think he's necessary in cash games. Tremendous performances recently, 55, 56, 54 on FanDuel, but at the end of the day, 54, 55, and 56 aren't paying off that huge price tag. So if you think he has a huge game, go ahead and slot him in there. I don't think it's going to kill you too much to look elsewhere. I mean, obviously, those points pretty much locked in. His floor seems to be right around 50, at least 45 points right now with the upside of 80. So don't think he's necessary, but I will have myself some exposure in tournaments. Right below him, we've got Chris Paul, $10,200 on FanDuel, $9,700 on DraftKings. This is an interesting one here because we've got both DeMarcus Cousins and Rudy Gay questionable for this game. If both of those guys end up sitting, there's not a chance I'm paying up for Chris Paul or Blake Griffin tonight in this matchup because this game will not be close if those guys aren't able to suit up. So I'm hesitant here. I'm looking over at the spreads, and it's a close one right now. I mean, you've got the Clippers, of course, the favorite, 7 points, 216.5 point total. So biggest total on the night. You got to like that. But with both those guys questionable, maybe one sits, maybe one plays. I like to think if DeMarcus Cousins plays, maybe the game could be somewhat competitive. But especially with Blake Griffin back in the mix, it's going to be really tough to pay this kind of salary for Chris Paul tonight. So I think I'll be looking elsewhere as I did yesterday. And that fade that Spencer and I talked about ended up working out pretty fine. Chris Paul, 38 fantasy points, wasn't a necessity, obviously. Played himself a fine game, but didn't pay off his price tag. So I think that's the route I'll be going again tonight, especially on an 11-game slate. No need to force him in there. Steph Curry, $10,100 on FanDuel. Over on DraftKings, once again, a little bit more affordable, only $9,400. A ridiculously low price for him there. Matchup with Jeff Teague and the Hawks tonight. Two best teams in the league, record-wise. Hard to argue they aren't the actual two best teams. 209 point total, 6.5 point favorite for Golden State, and Klay Thompson's out. So I'm going here with Steph Curry as my to pay or stay away, and I'm saying pay for Steph Curry tonight. I love him, especially on DraftKings at that price. It's going to be a close game. Atlanta's got everyone except Kyle Korver in. He's out for at least 3 games with a broken nose. I love Steph Curry tonight. I'm paying for him. Not paying for John Wall against Utah. In fact, I'm not playing anyone against Utah right now. Their defensive numbers are off the charts. They are absolutely insane right now against every position. Point guards have had a decent amount of success against them recently, but not paying John Wall's price tag in this matchup. Pass for me. Next player I will be playing, Kyle Lowry. Tremendous price on DraftKings tonight. $7,400. If you are not playing Kyle Lowry on DraftKings tonight, you may need to get your head checked because he is hot. He's on fire right now. 3 of his last 4 games, 47 or more fantasy points. Triple-double last time out. Struggled the game before that against Portland. Shot wasn't falling. But then right before that, 19-8-8 against Miami. Time before that, 32-4-5 against the Spurs. He's keeping the ball, not turning it over much. 3-4-4, 1-1-1 turnovers his last 6 games. Kyle Lowry, 8,500 on FanDuel in play for me as well, but he is dollar for dollar my favorite point guard option at DraftKings. So get yourself some Kyle Lowry tonight and reap the benefits. Next up, we've got team questionable, which is the Minnesota Timberwolves. You've got Ricky Rubio, Nikola Pekovic. Everybody seemingly questionable for this team. Really hard to peg what's going to happen here. Could be a blowout, but I like to think that Minnesota may be able to keep this one close enough that Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, guys like that still end up paying off their price tag. But it would be nice to know some information about these guys. Obviously, some lingering injuries, some concerns there. Ricky Rubio, I hear he's a full go. Could be a tournament play, but as we said, he's kind of been getting his minutes cut down recently by Flip Saunders, so not a route that I'll be taking outside of maybe a single bullet if I hear he's not on a minutes limit, but I think there are better options tonight. For instance, Jeff Teague, $7,000 FanDuel, 67 on DraftKings. Matchup with Steph Curry, obviously not ideal, but playing up in pace, I mean, he's going to be able to do a lot tonight. I like him in this spot, especially with Steph Curry out. Or not with Steph Curry, with Klay Thompson out. Steph Curry will be needing to do more on offense. I like Jeff Teague quite a bit at 7,000 and 6,700. Goran Dragic, interesting play. A fine matchup against Damian Lillard and the Blazers here. 6,800 on FanDuel and 6,300 on DraftKings. I think he's a fine play. George Hill as well. 66 and 68 FanDuel DraftKings there. Played some great basketball recently. Tremendous consistency, seemingly a floor right around 25 fantasy points, ceiling of 45 to 50. So you don't know exactly what you're going to get from him, but you know he's got a nice floor. And Chicago giving up huge numbers to point guards right now. So George Hill certainly in play for me. Moving on down the list, we've got even more targets. Tony Parker, Spurs played last night. I already mentioned that tough loss. He did play 38 minutes, but just 25 in the previous game. I think Parker's fine. He'll be good to go in this one. Spurs do need to win. I mean, basically, they had their chance at being in the 5 seed last night. Fell to the 7 seed with that loss. Really tough loss. Spurs really want to get home court. They're going to be trying to win this game, of course. Defensive-minded team for Milwaukee. However, Michael Carter-Williams, not sure he even knows what the word defense is. Not a good defender. I like Tony Parker to have himself a nice game at 6,500 on FanDuel and 6,600 on DraftKings. So, especially with no legit rim protector there for Milwaukee, he should be able to get to the bucket at will tonight. Reggie Jackson, I'm not chasing the huge game with Monroe back. Already mentioned the spacing. It's really tough for him. He was struggling for that. Sure, his confidence will be riding high. He may have a fine game against Philly, but same time, I'll let everyone else chase that, and I'll go ahead and stay away. And despite the good matchup with Reggie Jackson, I think there are better options there. And I tend to think he's going to be fairly high owned tonight, and I don't think he's a necessity. If you want some cheaper options, you can look at guys like Ray McCallum at 5,100 on FanDuel, 47 on DraftKings. He's in a fine spot. I'm not really reaching for a whole lot of other guys. If Ricky Rubio sits, Zach LaVine has been fine, sitting at $4,200 on FanDuel and 4,000 on DraftKings. I think he's a fine option as well. Only if Ricky Rubio sits. Not a huge ceiling for this guy, but you should expect 25 fantasy points right around there. And at that price, more than enough. If you like him, I think he's fine. Really not reaching for anyone else. I mean, you can look at a guy like Dante Exum, who's been playing big minutes, but he doesn't produce much. He's kind of a DeMarco Bellinelli type, where he's on the floor. He's not asked to do a whole lot, but he's a filler. I mean, he's a fine defender, not much of a scorer, really doesn't contribute much. So, I mean, that's pretty much just a desperation punt right there that you hope will get you 20 fantasy points. Moving over to shooting guard. Two payers stay away. Dwayne Wade, I'm paying for Dwayne Wade today, tomorrow, every other time he is on the court until he cools off. This guy's on fire right now, playing between 31 and 35 minutes, 38 or more fantasy points in 4 of his last 5. The one dud, if you want to call it that, was 33. So carrying his team on his back right now. He's trying to lead them into the playoffs. They're fighting for that playoff spot. Dwayne Wade at 8,200 on FanDuel and still a great 7,800 on DraftKings. Not a must play. I don't think there's many must plays on 11-game slate, but one of my favorite plays for tonight. Also, Victor Oladipo. Tobias Harris injured his ankle, left yesterday's game, did not return. It's listed as questionable for tonight, but I do think, as we've seen before, Victor Oladipo, Nikola Vucevic, Bucci Mane, both guys get an increase in not only minutes, but production, usage without Tobias Harris. I tend to assume he's going to sit tonight. Oladipo coming off yet another big game. 46 fantasy points last night, 0 turnovers against Houston. So impressive performance for him there. He's sitting there at 7,700 on both sites. Like him a great deal as well. Next up, we have DeMar DeRozan, $7,300 on FanDuel and $7,000 on DraftKings. So great price for him as well. Mentioned some struggles there. Minnesota maybe not able to keep this one close. We'll see who ends up playing, but Toronto's not playing great basketball right now either, so I tend to think this one will stay closer more than likely, at least enough for these guys to pay off their tags, and just a tremendous matchup there. So it remains to be seen. It is a 9-point spread, but 207 point total, so not going all in on him, but I would still prefer Kyle Lowry. But if you need a shooting guard, I think DeRozan's a fine way to go. Monte Ellis, sitting at 6,900, one of my least favorite players to roster. 6,700 on DraftKings, but you got to consider him tonight in the matchup against Orlando. He's their main scorer still. I know Chandler Parsons, who I'll get to in a minute, playing very well, scoring a lot of points. Monte Ellis finally starting to turn it on. 32 or more fantasy points on FanDuel, 3 of his last 4 games. So the one exception there being the Clippers game, only played 26 minutes. I do like Monte Ellis tonight. I would prefer pay a little bit more, go with an Oladipo, pay a little bit more than that, or go with Wade. But I think he's fine if he fits in your lineups tonight. Not a huge amount of upside at that price, but you should see 30-plus fantasy points tonight. I think that's more than enough. You can look at the Greek Freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo, but from my ends, Greg Popovich was furious at the performance by the Spurs last night. I expect vintage Spurs tonight, a great lockdown defensive performance. I'm not targeting any Milwaukee players tonight. Don't see the necessity, don't see the need. Despite us being in Milwaukee, a 4.5-point spread, 196-point total. I'm not paying his tag tonight. No thanks. Pass for me. The tag I will be paying is Avery Bradley, $6,200 on FanDuel, and once again, a little discount on DraftKings at $5,800. You got to like what he's been doing with Isaiah Thomas out, who is also not traveling with the team. So no concern that he's a game-time decision, anything of that nature. Really impressive performance by Avery Bradley last time out. 20, 10, and 6. Granted, it was against Philly. Obviously a better matchup than OKC. But at the same time, OKC's defense, mentioned it before, they're playing awful defense right now from top to bottom. Not a single player playing great defense. You're missing Serge Ibaka. I like Avery Bradley a ton tonight, especially on DraftKings. So, going to get myself some exposure. Bradley Beal, I know, playing well. Like I said, not targeting Washington players tonight against Utah. Pass for me. A little bit further down on shooting guard, you've got an interesting play here in Kent Bazemore. $5,500 now, jacked up price on FanDuel. But the guy's been producing 38 and 29 minutes his last 2, 29 and 27 points. Granted, Lakers and Sacramento, 2 of the better teams, better matchups for a shooting guard. But, already mentioned Kyle Korver is out for this one. And if you look over on DraftKings, Kent Bazemore is listed at $4,000. So, little bargain bin special right there for a guy who's going to see a solid amount, upper 20s, maybe even low 30s in minutes tonight. I like him a ton on DraftKings. Not paying that $5,500 price tag on FanDuel. Think that's a little bit much. But I think you definitely need to give him a look on DraftKings at that bargain bin price. Also, J.R. Smith playing a nice amount of minutes. The Nets have not been competitive for many games recently. They're not playing good basketball. I like to think that Cleveland's going to run away with this one. And not too hard to argue because Vegas agrees with me. A -11 spread. Brooklyn Big dog here, 205-point total. This one gets out of hand. J.R. Smith may see a little bit of extra run there. 5,600 on FanDuel. And over on DraftKings, once again, 5,500. A little bit of a discount there. So I think he's a fine play if you're looking for someone. I'm not going to go all in on it, but I think he's a good tournament play tonight. Looking further down at shooting guard, not a whole lot to like. In fact, really nothing to like. Nobody here I'm really reaching for. You could look at a guy like Jody Meeks if you're desperate, but I'm going to be paying up for a few of these guys, or at least a mid-range at shooting guard tonight. Don't see the need to reach tonight on an 11-game slate down low for a guy that you don't feel comfortable with. So that's a pass for me. Moving on to small forward, LeBron James. To pay or stay away here for me, and I'm staying away. I mean, he had huge game against Orlando, big game against the Spurs, but it wasn't overtime. Struggled against his old team in Miami, just 30 fantasy points. He's sitting at $11,200 tonight, and it's really hard to justify that tag in a big spread. Yes, he may have a big game, but big point spread, 11 games on the slate. I just don't think it's necessary to force LeBron James into your lineup. So outside of maybe a tournament lineup, since I will be making multiples, that's a stay away for me for LeBron James. Don't think he's necessary in cash games. I think balance is kind of the way to go today, unless something changes throughout the day. Maybe we hear Kyrie Irving's quad injury is serious and he sits out, in which case that would bump up LeBron. But as is right now, sitting at $11,200 and 10-6 on DraftKings, a little easier to stomach. Be more likely to play him on DraftKings tonight. Kawhi Leonard struggled last night. He's 8,500 on FanDuel, 86 on DraftKings. Little pricey for a matchup like this, but at the same time, usually has that pretty nice floor. I guess you could go that route. Don't think he's necessary either. A guy that I will be looking at is Draymond Green. 7,800 at small forward on FanDuel, 72 at power forward on DraftKings. And, I mean, I don't need to tell you what Draymond Green can do. In fact, he has 10 steals, 5 and 5 in his last 2 games. This guy fills up every area of the stat sheet. He's a tremendous player. This is a big game for Golden State. Obviously, Klay Thompson now out. Maybe he picks up a couple extra shots. I like Draymond Green a lot tonight. Another guy I do like, but his price is getting very expensive. Nick Batum, $7,000 on FanDuel, $6,900 on DraftKings. I mean, he's playing great basketball. 35 or more fantasy points in 5 of his last 7 games. So the guy's really producing with Wesley Matthews out now, playing big minutes. But at that price, I mean, it's kind of prohibitive. I would prefer to go down a little bit too. Chandler Parsons, $6,400, FanDuel, $67 on DraftKings. He's kind of getting this Dallas offense rolling. Obviously, we know Dirk Nowitzki, not the force that he once was. Monte Ellis has had his struggles, but Chandler Parsons playing great since coming back, especially his last 2 games. 37 and 36 fantasy points. He's scoring, he's rebounding, even had 4 assists 2 games ago. So he will be my favorite target at small forward at 6,400. Outside of Draymond Green, if you can pay up for him, I like him a great deal. FanDuel only, of course, due to his eligibility. But a little bit cheaper, we do have another play I like a bit, and you're going to notice a trend here. Games that matter. We already talked about this before, mentioned in the pod at the early in the week. A lot of teams resting players, a lot of teams missing players, a lot of games that don't matter. Atlanta and Golden State does matter. So I'm going to be getting myself as much exposure to games that matter, teams that care right now, and obviously those two right in the mix here. So DeMarre Carroll has already sat out 2 of his last 6 games and had a great game against Sacramento last time out, 31 fantasy points. He's sitting there at $5,500 on both sites. I like DeMarre Carroll a good amount tonight at that price. A great mid-range option for you. And cheaper option here, there's not a lot of them. I'm looking at Rodney Hood, $4,600 at small forward on FanDuel, and a similar price on the same price on DraftKings at $4,600 as well. The guy's playing a decent amount of minutes. He's obviously not going to repeat his performance against Charlotte. 34 fantasy points in 22 minutes is a little bit, actually a lot too much to ask for Rodney Hood, but right around 20 to 25 fantasy points in his 28 to 30 minutes of play seems about right. I like Rodney Hood as a punt if you're going that direction. Also, not official yet, but there's rumors that Justin Holiday will be starting for Klay Thompson tonight. He's $3,800 at small forward on FanDuel, $3,200 on DraftKings at shooting guard. So You want a cheap play. He played well when given minutes. I mean, 36 minutes against Denver, 31 fantasy points. 22 minutes against New York, 23. So, cheap options. I think Justin Holiday, one of the better ones on the slate. Even if he doesn't draw the start, seems like he's going to be in line for some extra runs. So, get yourself some Justin Holiday if you want a nice punt with a decent amount of upside. I like him a lot tonight. Power forward. Going here at the top. We're going with Blake Griffin to pay or stay away. I'll preface this by saying, if DeMarcus Cousins and Rudy Gay both play, I absolutely love Blake Griffin. 9,300 on FanDuel, 9,000 on DraftKings. If one of the two guys play, I still like Blake Griffin. If they both sit, it's going to be hard to pay for Blake Griffin in this spot because the game likely will not be close. So keep an eye on those situations, but provided that one or both of those two guys play, I assume at least one of them will suit up. I'm paying for Blake Griffin. The guy's playing well. He's locked into big minutes. Clippers need to win now. These games are all important to them. And 37 and 42 fantasy points in 41 and 36 minutes, his first two games. Double-double each time, almost a triple-double the first game. Blake Griffin is back, and he's ready to dominate again. And he is underpriced for his upside. He has elite upside. Only $9,000 on DraftKings. I prefer him a ton over LaMarcus Aldridge, Pau Gasol, guys like that. Gasol too overpriced, I think, given a matchup against a tough defensive team in Indiana who's playing some of the best defensive basketball in the game. It's just a little bit too much for me there. Aldridge isn't in a bad spot, but at 9,400, once again, he's going to need a lot to pay off his price tag. I think that Griffin possesses the upside that those two guys do not. So Griffin is the play for me there. Paul Millsap sitting once again way too cheap, $7,800 on FanDuel, and on DraftKings the same exact price, $7,800. When the guy's been playing minutes, he's tremendous. Last two games, 37 and 35 minutes. He has put up 50 and 39 fantasy points on DraftKings. So Paul Millsap, an elite option tonight. And if the Warriors do struggle anywhere, it's against power forwards. They don't have an elite defender there. So I like Paul Millsap a ton tonight from Atlanta. I actually like a lot of Atlanta players and a lot of Golden State players, as you've seen. Moving on a little bit further down these salaries here, you've got guys like Derek Favors and Nerlens Noel. Both guys in fine spots. Favors not an ideal matchup against Washington. 7,700. He's been playing well outside of his last game, which was a blowout. Obviously, they didn't need him to do a whole lot. I like both these guys. They're more tournaments for me. Obviously, Favors with a tougher matchup. Noel in a fine matchup, but his price really getting up there. $7,500 and $74 on DraftKings. I think that's a pass for me outside of tournaments. If you're looking for another play right around this range, you could do much, much worse than Thaddeus Young, who's playing great right now. $6,000 in this matchup is a fine price for him on FanDuel against Cleveland, who is playing much better defense, yes, but the power forward position, Kevin Love, Tristan Thompson, whoever it may be, not exactly a tough road for most guys. So I like Thaddeus Young, $6,200 on DraftKings. I think he's the best mid-range option because you see guys like Nikola Mirotic, already mentioned, tough matchup, and he is playing minutes. Taj Gibson is officially out for today. It wasn't announced until this morning, but he is officially out for at least one more game. But $7,200 on DraftKings for Nikola Mirotic, way too much for me. At $6,700, I could stomach him on FanDuel in a couple lineups, but he's definitely past that must-play range. I mean, he's certainly got some upside, so get some exposure, but I'm not going overboard on Mirotic tonight, especially on DraftKings. Other options you've got at power forward, Ersan Ilyasova, $4,700 on FanDuel, $5K on DraftKings. The guy's been fairly consistent. I mean, he's put up decent numbers his last two games against New Orleans, Memphis, and Indiana. All tough matchups there. 36, 20, and 29 fantasy points. So he's a nice filler. Not a guy I'm actively targeting, but if he fits, another one of those guys, I'm fine with him being in my lineup. If DeMarcus Cousins sits, I'm looking at Jason Thompson, and I'm one of the many who he has let down in this situation when he's drawn a start. A little bit extra usage with Cousins out. But he does possess that upside. He's had those huge games a couple times this year, a couple times throughout his career, and I will be rostering Jason Thompson tonight at $4,200 and $3,300 on DraftKings if DeMarcus Cousins sits tonight. So be on the lookout for that news. It's going to be big news for both sides of that game. Center tonight, to pay or stay away here, is going to be DeMarcus Cousins. And for me, it's a wait and see. It's a neither. So with DeMarcus Cousins, if he plays, you like his spot. I mean, 10,900, a little bit much on FanDuel. Don't think he's a necessity like guys like Chris Paul. It's kind of that same boat. You want to get some exposure, but you don't have to have him. 10K on DraftKings, still a little bit of a discount there. For me, it's a tournament-only play for DeMarcus Cousins, especially due to his being less than 100%. Excuse me. And, you know, it's a fine matchup. DeAndre Jordan is a good rebounder. I don't think he's a great defender. He's a good shot blocker. But DeMarcus Cousins still wins that battle more often than not, if you ask me. So I think he's a fine tournament play if he goes, but not a route that I'll necessarily be traveling tonight, especially at that price. Where I will be going is Nikola Vucevic. $8,400. Already mentioned Tobias Harris out for tonight, more than likely. He's questionable, did not return last night. I don't imagine that he'll be back. Obviously no official word, so monitor that as well. But Dallas, the worst rebounding team in the entire league. And I know that sounds strange, especially with Tyson Chandler down low, but little known fact is that they've just been getting pummeled on the boards. Dirk Nowitzki's rebounding numbers down. Chandler is really the only consistent rebounder they have on the team. Vucevic at 8,400, 83 on DraftKings. Could be in line for a huge night tonight. Increased usage, and I like him a ton. Andre Drummond. This guy has just given people fits all season long. He's impossible to play in cash games at times. Then he's the guy who goes for 60 fantasy points. And he's had some huge games in tough matchups recently. 59 fantasy points against Golden State on FanDuel. 49 against Memphis, coming off concussion symptoms the day before. Now he gets Philly, who second worst rebounding team in the league, barely above Dallas. Andre Drummond's going to have himself a nice game tonight. I like him quite a bit, and he is still at a discount on DraftKings, $7,500, 83 on FanDuel. So on DraftKings, love Andre Drummond tonight. Think he has another monster game on the glass. Philly without a big man that can really compete on the glass, so gotta like him a ton. Rudy Gobert, really high floor, not much of a ceiling now anymore at his price tag. 8,200, 8,100 on DraftKings. It's going to be tough for him to give you much value return here. I mean, he's almost a lock for 35-plus fantasy points. But at the same time, I mean, it's really hard for him to go for 50 and give you much return. So that's going to be a pass for me. Another discounted center here, Al Horford. $6,900 on DraftKings. 79 on FanDuel is obviously a little more pricey, but huge discount there against Golden State. He will see some Andrew Bogut tonight, which isn't an ideal matchup. He's given up some size there. We know Atlanta a little bit undersized down low. But if you want a discount there, I'm fine with him on DraftKings. The guy I'm going to be targeting the most is Enes Kanter. $6,500 on FanDuel, $6,600 on DraftKings. If you've been paying attention, I don't need to tell you what this guy's been doing. His last 5 games, taking out a 22-point performance against the Clippers, where he had 18 and 5. It wasn't even a bad game even. 42, 42, 39, 34 fantasy points. Makes for an even better play on DraftKings with the double-double bonus because 4 of his last 5 games, he has reached that level and easily. Putting up monster double-doubles right now. If you can't afford Westbrook, this is the guy you want as your share of the OKC game tonight. Obviously, on the other side of things, you've got Boston, who it's hit or miss. I mean, obviously, I mentioned Avery Bradley. I like Avery Bradley a lot. But Enes Kanter and Russell Westbrook are carrying the load here for OKC. So those are the guys I'm targeting. If Nikola Pekovic sits once again, Gorgui Dieng in play, 64 and 59 on DraftKings. I think he's a fine play. You could look at Justin Hamilton, but man, his price jacked up. $5,600 on FanDuel. Producing well, but not sure I can stomach that price. I would much rather pay a little bit more and get myself Enes Kanter. $4,500 on DraftKings. I'm fine with that. I'll pay that in a tournament, assuming Pekovic is out. But not for me at $5,600 on FanDuel. Cheaper guys, you can look at Andrew Bogut, Robin Lopez. Neither one with a huge ceiling, but both guys in play for me. Steven Adams, the only other guy I want to talk about. $4,600. Played 30-plus minutes each of his last 2 games. 33 and 21 fantasy points. These 2 big men, Kanter and Adams, are dominating down low. And Boston, as we know, a weak front court. So on a site like DraftKings, you can roster both of those guys, Kanter and Adams. I did it in a few tournaments the other day. Worked out pretty well for me. Rostered both of them for less than $11,000. and you've got significant upside. I mean, you're going to be dominating the glass down there with those two guys. So maybe not a bad strategy. I'm even fine with playing Adams if you can't afford Cancer. Obviously preferring Cancer, but if Adams just fits, I'm fine with that as well. And with that, I will be wrapping up today's podcast. We have, as usual, some great content for you at dailyfantasycafe.com. Check out our Twitter page at DFCafe. I'm at BigItaly42, and I'm checking out. I will see you guys tomorrow for the Thursday podcast previewing tomorrow's slates.